Hi, everyone. This is Ken Fitternick, the host of Courageous Conversations about our schools. I want to say something before you hear the interview with my guest, Haley Watson. Dr. Watson is a clinical psychologist with lots of experience dealing with childhood trauma, bullying, and skills educators can teach to help students become healthier socially and emotionally, and how that can help them become more successful in school. One day after the fascinating conversation you were about to hear, a 14-year-old student at Apalachee High School in Winder, Georgia, walked onto campus with a military-style rifle and killed two other 14-year-old students and two math teachers. He also injured at least 8 others before he was taken into custody. After reading about this tragic story, about how this student, Colt Gray, had been desperately seeking mental health support, how he had been bullied and a victim of abuse, I thought I have to speak with Dr. Watson again about this. I want to see what she thinks about what schools can do to prevent these horrific acts of violence, how schools can help be a place to help students and parents and even teachers cope with the trauma and fear so many of them are facing today. I hope you will tune in to the second episode I recorded with Dr. Watson. I'm confident you will learn things that will be helpful. You might even come away with a bit of hope, as I did, that there is a better way forward. Here now is the first of 2 interviews with Dr. Haley Watson.
There's stuff going on in my life, but I don't know if I can tell people about it.
It made me feel really out of place at school.
Feel sad, and sometimes I start to cry.
When I'm angry, it feels like a volcano.
I felt bad towards myself and the way it was. I hated my body even, hated how I looked.
People just saw me as a victim. Nobody really saw me as who I was before. It's very taboo to talk about it.
My first ever bully, he threw my lunchbox around.
When I don't understand a math problem, I get really angry, and sometimes I shout at my mom.
And I was feeling, really depressed and lonely. And like I had no friends and no one liked me.
I think that my mindset changed a little bit about school, and I was like, I'm gonna go into this with a positive mindset.
I think happy thoughts, that I'm super smart.
I just always take deep breaths, and I let myself know that I will get through it and that those negative thoughts are not true.
When I do talk about my emotions with people, it helps a lot.
It takes the most courage to stand up to your friends and family. I think everybody has enough courage somewhere inside them to tell people what they want, but some people don't realize it.
Without being able to reflect, I wouldn't have been able to get here. I used to struggle a lot, and it's nice to say that now I'm okay.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Courageous Conversations about our schools. This is your host, Ken Fitternick. And if you've listened to this podcast, you know we deal with a whole range of challenging, sometimes controversial topics related to education. I also interview conflict experts like Amanda Ripley, the author of High Conflict, and Monica Guzman, author of I Never Thought of It That Way, to better understand the dynamics that make these conversations so challenging sometimes. So challenging that we sometimes just avoid having the conversations at all, or we end up just speaking or in some case shouting past one another. But today we're going to be talking about the conversations adults have with children and the interactions between children. We're going to be talking about bullying and students' mental health. My guest today is Haley Watson. Dr. Watson is a clinical psychologist who has a wealth of experience on school bullying and 15 years of experience developing and delivering well-being programs for schools. She's worked with school districts, governments, police departments, charities, and private corporations around the world to build systems of support for both youth and adults. Haley, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. Yeah. Tell our listeners where you live and just a bit about what you do now.
Yeah, I live in LA. Recently moved here. I used to live in Australia and I'm originally from Canada.
Oh, wow.
A bit of a roundabout way. And I create mental health programs for schools. My organization, Open Parachute, we create resources for schools that teachers use to teach their students mental health skills. And we also have resources for educators and their own well-being and also for parents.
It's terrific. We're going to get into all of this in more detail, but we heard some voices at the top of the show of students talking. Say a little bit about what we were listening to.
Yes. So one of the core elements of our program is that our student lessons are centered around student voices, peer voices. So students in class get to watch another student that's their age talking about a challenge they've gone through and how they overcame it. And that's a really important element of our program because one of the biggest challenges when it comes to things like mental health and friendship dynamics and all those things is that there's a lot of shame involved in it. And so it's really hard to reflect deeply as a student and acknowledge what's happening for you until you hear it from someone else your own age saying, yeah, this is what I felt like and this is what happened for me. So some of the voices you heard are the voices of the real students that appear in our programs.
I can't think of a more important topic for parents and educators to be discussing these days. It seems like a day doesn't go by when I don't see a report about mental health challenges affecting students, cyberbullying and bullying, and it's all linked to something that I'm very concerned about, both where I live, but across the country, which is chronic absenteeism. And it appears to be from the studies that have been done about this phenomenon, it's kind of a post-pandemic phenomenon, that chronic absenteeism is often related to mental health issues in schools. I heard just I think it was last week in a webinar, that the highest percentage of students who are affected by mental health challenges are adolescent girls. And you may want to talk a little bit about that, but we'll get into all those things in just a moment. But I would love to have you talk a little bit about how you got into this in the first place. You've been doing it for a number of years, but I know there's a story that I haven't heard you tell myself about what prompted you to get into this work.
Absolutely. So I think like so many of us that are in the helping profession that want to help kids, especially, we do that because we struggled when we were young, and I'm no different in that. So I had a very bizarre experience happen to my family when I was very, very little. Went through a sort of seriously traumatic event where somebody bombed our house with dynamite 5 times over the period of a year and a half. Really, really bizarre. They actually made a Canadian version of the Unsolved Mystery Show about it because they never solved it. We, to this day, do not know who did this. But I grew up in this tiny little sleepy town in Canada. And just one day, our car blew up. Somebody put dynamite under the front passenger seat of the car. Luckily, we were in it at the time, but luckily no one was sitting in that seat. And then a few months later, we woke up in the middle of the night and the side of our house had exploded because there was dynamite there. And this was sort of 5 times, again, over a year and a half. And because there was we had no idea why, there was no notes left, there was nothing, it never really also ended. It didn't happen again eventually, but it wasn't like, great, we've solved it, we've caught the person, we can finish this and put a line under it. It was just this fear that my family lived with. And because that happened when I was sort of those really formative years between 2 and 4, which is, again, my experience is unique in that there's not that many people that have been bombed, but it's not unique in that so many kids go through something hard. And sometimes it's something really, really awful and scary like abuse. And sometimes it's, just change or transition or parents separating or bullying or whatever it is. But things that happen when we're young impact us. And so what I learned to do, which is what so many kids learn to do, is just bury those feelings, because what else are you going to do with it? All of that fear, and no way of resolving it. So I just learned to bury it, became a bit of a perfectionist, was the kind of kid that you would never think had any challenges in school, because I did all my homework. I was, a model student. I played sports. I had friends, but all of those things I was doing to feel safe. And so it wasn't until I was older and started making really unhelpful decisions, because of course, if you're trying to block out your feelings and then you get introduced to alcohol and you get introduced to partying, you get introduced to things that disconnect you more from yourself, you go down that path. So it wasn't until I was, much older that I started to realize I am making really bad decisions for myself. I don't really know how to connect to myself because I've spent so long just suppressing who I really am. And so after learning that through therapy and all of those things, and finally kind of coming into my own, I realized if I had learned this when I was in school, if I had learned this skill set of, oh, this has impacted me and this is why I'm acting in this way, and actually I can be more myself, I don't have to work so hard to try to be perfect, and all of these kinds of things. If I'd learned this, I wouldn't have had to learn so many other things the hard way. And so that really is where my passion comes from, for the kids that act out, for the kids that suppress, for all of the different ways that mental health plays out. We need a skill set. We need to learn, how are my thoughts impacting me? Why am I doing the things I'm doing? And that's a skill set we can teach. And so that's my passion, is really trying to help other kids know this stuff as they're developing, instead of having to unlearn it all once they become an adult.
So the first thought that comes to mind when I think about educator, well, first of all, the first thing that really comes to mind is what an incredible experience that you and your family had to endure, and this idea that it wasn't just a one-time event, it went on, and then you didn't have any reason to believe that it was going to stop. So you're constantly living in. Did you ever think of moving? And
yeah, I mean, I think we tried and no one would buy the house because, it's the house that was getting bombed. It was like this tiny little town. So we did eventually move like across the street because somebody bought it, but it took a few years for that to happen. Yeah, and my parents, I think, were just at a bit of a loss of like, what are we meant to do here? They flew in police officers. It was it's such a small town that there weren't even cops there, so they literally kind of stationed someone there for this. But yeah, no, there was sort of nothing else they could do, essentially.
I think about my own childhood, and all kids have fears, and some of them are quite irrational. I remember, I thought there was some sort of a monster that lived underneath my bed, and I had to be reassured, that's very normal. But as an adult, and a whole family who's dealing with something that is truly traumatic and frightening, it must have been so challenging for your whole family. And I could really imagine why that would live on. And it was interesting, you alluded to, it doesn't, not many people get traumatized that way, but they get traumatized in other ways. And it almost doesn't matter. I think what I heard you say is the point is that we carry those things around and often don't know what to do with it.
Exactly. And everyone has their own version, and every kid gets impacted differently. But there's so many things that families face that are out of their control. A parent losing their job, even a few years ago when people were going through COVID and the isolation, and these things that happen that parents can't say, don't worry, everything's going to be fine. I mean, we can say that, but just like you said with the monster on the bed, a parent can definitively say there is no monster under your bed, but we can't always definitively say everything's going to be fine. Like, we face challenges as families. And so there are certain things that kids know, they pick up on, they understand on some level that there's some danger or there's something happening that's sad or hard, that's out of their control. And those are the things that stay with us.
For educators listening to it or parents listening to it, and you talk about lessons that can be taught and the skills that kids can learn as you did eventually to cope with your trauma. I'm thinking, does a teacher need to be a clinical psychologist like you, or does every school need to have someone there so that if a teacher notices there's a child who they suspect is dealing with mental health challenges, you can send them there? So how does this work? How do kids, when you implement these programs in schools, how do kids get the kind of assistance that you're talking about?
It's a great question. So basically, there needs to be layers. So we do need to have someone in a school setting, whether it's a psychologist or it's a social worker or it's a, someone that those referrals can be made to for students that really are very distressed or there's big challenges happening. And that's really important. But the thing that we forget about is that every single student has some version of this, some sort of challenge, whether it's big or small. And so we have to also bring this learning into the classroom. And so our whole aim and our whole suite of resources is all designed for any teacher to be able to deliver. So it's really, and that's a really important part because teachers are not clinical psychologists, but they have to deal with mental health every single day. So it's not realistic to say, anytime you see a challenge, refer, because that leaves teachers without a skill set or an understanding or resources on what do I do when a student is just a bit stressed in front of me, or what do I do when friends are getting or students are getting into friendship challenges all the time, like things that are really related to mental health. And teachers need that skill set and students need that skill set. So our whole aim is to create resources that are really easy for teachers to deliver, but that go really deep so that students and the whole school can have this understanding so that when there's a deeper issue, yes, we refer that, but everybody has a higher base that they're starting from. There's this core skill set. Just like we teach math or English, we teach a core skill set, then we can go a lot deeper with it. That's the same thing we need to do with these mental health skills.
Okay, so let's make this more concrete for me and our listeners. Describe an example of something, a lesson or an activity a teacher might do, what it looks and sounds like, so that people can, all of us listening into you can get a sense of what this would be like if we walked into a classroom where this was happening.
Absolutely. So I'll describe a classroom that I talked to recently that's been using our resources, struggling with something that's happening all over the country, but in this specific instance, lots of students were getting into these friendship arguments. Some people were calling it bullying, some people were just calling it disagreements, but it was dominating class time. And this is often related to mental health. Why are we mean to each other? We're mean because we're in pain. And so it's just this constant challenge for teachers, and this was sort of at a middle school level, to just be constantly resolving these things or putting these fires out or trying to get students back on task. And so they started using Open Parachute and they started using the lessons. And so I'll actually play you an excerpt from what the lesson is, but what they got to do is these students heard from peers their own age talking about having gone through experiences of being picked on and feeling rejected, and how that impacted them, and then how they got through it. And then after they watch this content, and these are real kids, so they get to really hear that authenticity, then the teacher leads them through a series of exercises where they really start to embed this learning and they start to understand, number one, and the biggest thing that the teacher fed back to about this is that their students started to understand, oh, when someone's mean to me, it's not personal. It's not about me. It's not my fault. It's actually because they are struggling. And that piece of information is so valuable because not only does it build empathy, but it also builds a sense of resilience in the self that I don't need to take on what other people are saying to me. And so everybody gets boosted up. The people that are being unkind start to recognize, wait a minute, what are the impacts of my actions here? And the people that are being mistreated start to build up a little bit of an internal coat of armor of like, okay, maybe there's some things I can do to help myself here, and I don't have to listen to all of these negative things that are being said about me. So why don't we play a little bit of the voices of these students so you can really hear the power of what it's like for these kids when they get to hear from peers.
That's great. I can't wait to hear.
When it was first happening, I was like, what have I done wrong? The more you hold in, the more you feel like you can't do it. and you're not good enough for anyone.
It felt very bad, and I was very, well, I mean, of course I got angry about it, and but I think another part of me felt kind of like depressed and very like, I don't know, just kind of down on myself. I developed low self-esteem, so I thought like, okay, well, I'm not pretty enough according to these people, and I won't make any friends. There were times when I didn't even want to look at myself, like in the mirror, like there are like pictures, like I had pictures of myself in my room, and I would like put the like picture down because I didn't want to look at myself. And then even in the mirror, it was very hard to look at myself. It wasn't something that I wanted to do.
I just felt like I was just always doing something wrong, and I didn't really know how to fix that problem. I tried like changing my personality at school to fit in with others. Sometimes it just felt like I was just like putting on like a full-time show for other people.
It's really poignant to hear the voices of students who are talking about these issues going on in their lives. And I think as you were describing your own story, Haley, before, what I remember encountering, and even today with friends and relatives, is that most people don't talk about these things. And so to hear students doing it, and not necessarily in the confines of a clinical psychologist's office, but more openly, with the teacher, with each other, it's a pretty amazing and sort of unique thing that I'm hearing. I think there's some out there that are probably going, "Oh my God, you're opening up stuff." Is an ordinary teacher with a little bit of training get prepared to have all this stuff unpacked and come out among other students? Are they really prepared to deal with this? And so I wonder what your thoughts are.
Absolutely. It's a great question. And it's a question we get asked a lot. What do I do if am I opening a can of worms?
Yeah.
And I think there's two things. One, an important thing to remember is just because we don't talk about it doesn't mean it's not there. So the can of worms is already open. And if we don't talk about it and build up a skill set, then what the teacher has to face is just the outcome of a bunch of students who don't understand why they're acting the way they're acting, and it just spills out everywhere. So that is much harder than if we come in and teach a specific skill set. And so the thing to remember in our program is it's not a therapy session. They're not, they don't go, "Okay, everybody share your story of bullying." Instead, it's saying, "Hey, here's people being very brave and courageous, talking about experience. Now we are going to learn a skill set so that if we are ever in a situation where that happens, we know what to do." So the lessons are very structured in that way. And it's sort of using that as an example. Okay, so we've heard from these students of their experience. One of the things they learned to do was change their thoughts about, other people's actions. Now let's go through a series of exercises where we're practicing that. So it's really not about kids dumping or all of a sudden, opening up all of their challenges. If it does uncover a challenge a student is having, that's a really good outcome, because that's a student can then be referred to a psychologist to have that conversation privately. But more so, the teacher gets to be in this role where they're helping students learn something practical. And so then this is really a benefit to teachers, because then the next time something happens in class, instead of not knowing what to do or being worried that they're going to say the wrong thing or like having to figure out on the fly, what do I do in this situation? They actually have something to refer back to. "Hey, we learned a skill set here. I noticed Johnny said something rude. How are we going to respond to that? What are we going to do to help ourselves?" So it's like this base of knowledge that now the teacher and the students have. So it's really preparing teachers better to face those things that happen every day.
So Haley, you've talked a lot about how to help kids who were the recipients, on the wrong end of these bullying or unkind behaviors, cope with it. And one thing I thought was really terrific, not just for kids but for adults, is to realize you don't necessarily have to choose to take it personally. It's not really necessarily about you at all, and that can be kind of liberating. But let's talk a little bit about the kids that do this. And I mean, we all grew up. I mean, it's nothing new about that. People do this for a variety of reasons. You know, I think of the expression hurt people, but sometimes it's done to gain attention from your peers, to bully or to make fun of someone else. And until and unless you know what effect it has, you just continue to do it because you've seen it done and you get reinforced by your peers. So talk about a lesson or the things that a teacher might do to help those who are inclined to do this to others and hurt people can come to grips with that and realize the impact they have.
Absolutely. So I think there's two things. One is absolutely, it's that empathy piece, is recognizing the impacts you're having. So we have a lot of exercises. We actually do one where students crumple up a piece of paper and then they open it up again and you see all these creases. And this lesson is, you can, when you crumple a piece of paper, when you hurt someone, you can unfold it, but those creases will always be there. So there's those kinds of lessons of this impact stays forever. But the second piece, and I think what's most important, is that when a student is acting in an unkind way, if we only focus on their behavior, that's never going to get to the root of why it's happening. And so the lessons where we're teaching them to recognize where is this coming from, which will be different for every student. So the lessons where we're going into, what are the thoughts I'm thinking? How is this a manifestation of my fight, flight, and freeze response? Because usually when we're unkind, it's actually a stress response. You know, we're feeling attacked, or we're feeling hurt, or whatever it is. So it's those pieces of what can I do differently. And I have a great story with this. We had a teacher reach out to us the other day, tell this story. You know, they were running these lessons in class, and you know, one of the students that they really was, you know, acts out a lot and is unkind a lot, and really they wanted, this is a student they wanted to be sort of paying attention the most, didn't seem like he was paying attention at all. And this happens a lot, you know, not participating. They're like, okay, this is not even, they're not even taking this in. But then a little bit later, the student was called to the principal's office, and he came in and the adults were talking, and he literally quoted from something from the program. He, in this very calm voice, and usually he would escalate and he would get mad and he would kind of, you know, get all upset and throw things. He very calmly said, I feel like no one is taking my perspective here. And that was the exact lesson that they were teaching, is like perspective taking. And so because he was able to recognize, oh, this is what I'm feeling like no one's taking my perspective, and that is causing me to act like a jerk and then be mean to other people. But actually, I can express that. And that means people might listen to me, and all of a sudden I don't have to act that way. So, and it was just such a poignant example of kids pick up on this. And when we show them and teach them, this might be what you're feeling, and here's something else you can do with that, it almost gets to the core of it. So instead of just focusing on you're doing something wrong, stop doing it, that doesn't really change much. But if it's more that recognition of, oh, I'm feeling rejected here, or I'm feeling unheard, and how can I express that? All of a sudden, there's no need for those unkind behaviors or unhelpful behaviors.
That's so fascinating, because one of the themes of what I've learned from people I mentioned before, Monica Guzman and Amanda Ripley, is that there's almost no greater need all of us have than to feel that we're being heard. And I'm not talking about just children, all of us. And if you don't feel heard, or the people don't care about what you think, they aren't interested in your perspective on things, it's very easy to become strident, to become, it's easy to dehumanize the other people, because they're not humanizing you by stopping and saying, I want to understand what you're saying, and I'm going to suspend my judgment. I just want to try to get it. And so what you're saying is that when kids feel heard and people are paying attention to them, it sort of validates them as a person. And sometimes the motivation for hurting others can dissolve away a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's about the recognition of the feeling underneath. The behavior is one thing, but if I can learn as a student or even as an adult, that I am, and I do this in my life, we always lash out at the people closest to us. But once you start recognizing, oh, I'm lashing out at you because I'm feeling stressed or because I'm feeling like you're not listening to me or whatever it is, then I can express that feeling. And then I have no need to lash out anymore. So it's absolutely listening and validating students. And that's what my whole book is about, is those conversation tools. How do you help? How do you have those conversations with students? But then also it's that, how do we teach students to recognize, what am I feeling when I'm unkind, and how can I express that in a different way to get a different outcome?
Yeah, it's interesting. Next week, I'm doing something down near Salinas, California, with a friend who's the head of a school board, and he heard about something I did recently, a family night at a Boys and Girls Club, and so what we did, and what he wants me to do with a whole bunch of kids and families in his district after they come together and eat, is the kids are going to be off in another room rehearsing an answer to the question, "How was your day?" And I ask parents, what do you typically hear? It's okay, terrible. It's usually one or two words. And so the kids are going to actually be encouraged to, and will role play and practice a longer answer. And when they come in the room, the parents are going to say, "How was your day?" And the kids will have a longer answer. And I've done this before, and the kids really get into it. And the parents say, I really do want to know how your day was. So take your time. And we have to remind parents that it may take, weeks before they kind of get used to it. And you can ask follow-up questions like, was there a part of the day that made you smile? Was anything funny happen? And it's so important to reinforce the importance of conversations between family members where you're listening to each other, people are feeling heard. And then the fun part of this at the end is with the kids are prepped to ask their parents, "How was your day?"
Oh, great.
And then we get the parents prepped to have an answer where they kind of model the vulnerability that they want their kids to show us. Like, I had a really hard day, and I'll tell you why. And what it does is, it just now occurring to me as I'm listening to you, it allows people, entire families, to feel heard, that you care about what's going on.
Yes.
When in the craziness of the day, when everyone's tired and everyone's working hard and you just want to get home and get dinner made and whatever you do, what sometimes gets pushed out is these really sacred moments for conversation, interaction, where you're saying, "Wait a minute, we're going to take 5 minutes and just listen to each other."
Yeah, absolutely. And we forget that kids need to learn that. They need it role modeled to them to learn, because they don't know all the things going on in our brains. And so they don't realize that everybody struggles and everybody has hard days. They don't know that unless we really actively tell them. And so when they're having a hard day, or they're feeling down, or they're having a challenge with a friend, that's what puts them in that shame spiral of, I'm the only one that's feeling this way. And that's why so many kids don't tell even their parents when they're struggling. They don't tell anyone because they feel like it's not an okay conversation to have. So I love what you're saying, and it's so vital to be encouraging these open conversations.
Yeah, so I want to shift just a little bit to one final set of questions about implementation of this kind of thing, and perhaps pushback you might get if your listeners out there who have heard this and said, "Well, this is all fine and well, but I'm got so much pressure to cover my curriculum, and I don't have time to stop and do lessons like this and have kids sharing." And so I have to have you just address this thing about, can we really afford to stop and pay attention to this? And I'm going back to something you said early on, is, teachers say, "I'm constantly having to deal with kids who are not paying attention, who are working out their relationship problems." So just to address that question. A lot of people say, "I don't have time for this," or I don't have time for my teachers to be doing it. I want them to focus on academic learning."
Absolutely. And I think that the simplest answer is, can we afford not to? Because if we don't focus on this, and this is what all the research is saying, and we're slowly starting to cotton on to this as a society, if if I'm a student and I don't have the ability to, switch off what's happening in my head and focus on my academics, or resolve the things that are going on in my life, or soothe my stress response because this exam is making me anxious. If I don't have this skill set, then my academics is going to suffer. I'm probably going to skip school. I might not graduate. All of these really academic outcomes, it's all incredibly linked. So if we don't take the time, and it's the same thing, we know literacy is an issue, so we teach it. We know we need everyone to have an amount of literacy. Same thing with physical health. We know that there are challenges later in life with obesity and things like that. So we teach nutrition because we've learned these things. If we don't teach these building blocks, kids don't learn it. And then what are the repercussions down the line? So many different repercussions in terms of mental health. And so what I would say then in terms of implementation is that we can't put the onus on the individual teacher to find a way to squeeze it in and have it be competing with all of the academics. What needs to happen is that the district and the school really need to believe in this vision, and they need to create that class time. So there needs to be the buy-in essentially across the whole board, saying we are going to prioritize this. If we care about this as a district, as a school, we are going to prioritize this. We are going to have class time set aside, and we are all going to recognize that this is going to help in every other way. So teachers really need that support of the whole school so that it is scheduled essentially, just like we'd schedule any other piece of learning.
Haley, as we start drawing to a close here, can you share with me and our listeners a success story, just where maybe a school that adopted this program and did this and reported back to you? I just have to share this story with you. Can you share one with our listeners?
Absolutely. One of the things we love the most is the stories from teachers and the things that they report back to us. So lots of different ones I could share. One that comes to mind is specifically a school where there was a lot of sort of stress around doing schoolwork, a lot of kind of anxiety around getting things done. A lot of the students were kind of not able to focus and concentrate, always needed guidance. Lots of them needed kind of exceptions all the time. Well, I can't take this test. It's too overwhelming. So really a lot of that kind of stress and overwhelm. And in running the lessons and in kind of diving into this and teaching these students how to manage their own stress levels, how to understand where their stress levels are coming from, what the teachers were able to see was students figuring these things out on their own and feeling more confident and having more agency in themselves. So instead of thinking every time they're feeling stressed, I can't do this, and needing someone to rescue them, they were able to start actually being able to say, yeah, okay, I can ask for help. I can also take a deep breath. I can use a soothing strategy. I can recognize why I'm having this thought. And so over time in doing this, the teachers were able to see their students starting to flourish and starting to believe in themselves more. And so they started seeing all of these kind of, they thought they were focusing on stress, but then all of these other ripple effects of like, oh, now they're resolving their friendship dynamic issues a little bit better. And now they're solving problems for themselves. And I think that's one of the things that I love the most about the feedback is this sense of, and that's, I guess our metaphor of open parachute. Every student has a parachute to help them when they're in a free fall. They just don't necessarily know how to open it. And so that's what we're trying to teach is how do I really encourage this person, the student in front of me, to know that they can find the resources to help themselves, because that's what they need in life. We can't be with them for every challenge that they face. And so that was just one example of a school. And then the teacher, the flip side of that is the teacher saying, oh my gosh, I now know a few things to say to remind them when they're in that situation. So I don't feel like just I'm stuck here going, I don't really know how to help you, or I have to fix this problem for you. So the teachers are feeling a bit more confident also in that.
I think there's so much wisdom in that. I think one of the great things that a teacher or a parent can sort of remind themselves about is that I've done my job well when they need me less.
100%.
And yet sometimes as parents or teachers, we like to be needed. And so we create this kind of dependence on us, and we sort of get some kind of satisfaction when they come back to us for help, when in reality, what your story reminds us of is that I've succeeded when I see my kids doing this on their own, that it has taken root and becomes a skill set that they've acquired, and they don't have to always come back. Not that I wouldn't be here, but well, Haley, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your amazing personal story, which I hate to say there was a silver lining in that. That not the right way to put it, but the fact that it led you to develop this program and to become a resource to schools and kids and families all over the world is a truly great thing. So I want to thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. And I just want to echo that. I love the sentiment. And I do believe that anyone that has been through something hard, beautiful things can come of it. We learn so much about ourselves, about others. And so often kids that go through the hardest things become the greatest teachers and become these people that have so much empathy and so much ability to help others. And so I do think it's a really important point that we acknowledge that we're not broken, or else we're all broken.
Yeah, right.
But it's that piecing ourselves back together that true growth comes from. And so it's sort of a message of hope for everyone that's gone through struggles.
Haley, tell our listeners what they can do if they want to learn more about your work and the resources you offer.
Yeah, so openparachuteschools.com is our website that has all of the information about our resources. Also, the book that I mentioned, you can have a look at that. That's a teacher resource on there. And then also you can find me on LinkedIn. That's sort of the main social media platform I use, Dr. Haley Watson.
Thank you so much, Haley, for joining us. And for those listening, you can find this and all of our episodes at schoolconversations.org and on your favorite podcasting platforms. So long, everyone.